I am your host, Gwen Caldwell. It's my honor and privilege to have Courtney Brown back on the show from Farsight.org. Welcome, Courtney. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, Gwen. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So, a lot of we're coming really right up on top of the global coastal event, and you're saying that you think the criteria for that has already been met. So would you just kind of give a brief overview about that, and then I want to get on to some of your newer projects.
Okay. Yeah, the words global coastal event are not words that we use. Those are words that Cliff High uses. And I love Cliff. I think he's great. Very interesting stuff that he's done. But it's different from what we have done. And so what we have done is a climate project that looked at climatic change between 2008, June 1st, and 2013, June 1st, which is this coming Saturday. And we found in our own remote viewing project done at the Farsight Institute major change. But this is also a situation where we were investigating the idea of multiple timelines. So with remote viewing, we're using perceptual information, using military-grade remote viewers. I don't know how many of your listeners are familiar with remote viewing, or some of them may be newbies, but the idea is that these remote viewers are trained in procedures that were developed by the United States military, or procedures that are derivative of those procedures, to perceive places, events, people across time and space. And it was originally used by the U.S. military for espionage purposes, and now we as civilians use it for research purposes. And for our climate project, we were looking at geographical locations all around the planet at a 5-year time span. And all the scientific controls were in place, perfect randomization, and the whole data are available on our website at farsight.org, Farsight, like seeing far, and .org, because we're a nonprofit. And there's also a DVD that contains a presentation of all of that information and our other projects as well, called the Farsight Experiments, that can be found on our website. And the idea is that we found a tremendous amount of planetary change between 2008 and 2013. 2008, all of the sessions randomly mixed in with the 2013 sessions were perfectly normal, and the 2013 sessions were not normal. They were lots of damage, and so what we were, and these were all coastal targets. So that's why Cliff High finds a correlation between what we were doing and his idea of the global coastal event. However, the understanding that we have, I've been experimenting a long time on the idea of there being multiple realities, multiple universes, actually parallel realities. And that is, we have published research on that was published in a leading peer-reviewed journal. And just the other day, last week, mainstream physicists and astronomers released data indicating that there are, in fact, billions, perhaps billions and billions of other universes, finally. and it was a major release of information last week. But before that, we were basically laughed at, just as people like Hugh Everett, the physicist, was laughed at back in the 1950s when he came out with his original discussion of the multiple universe concept. But these things are having their time and place, and now it is sort of that time and place. So the idea in a multiple reality sense is that it's impossible to predict a single future that hasn't occurred yet, because while it is happening simultaneously with the present, because when you're transferring information, you're transferring it in real time. So all realities and all past and present realities exist simultaneously. But the issue is that you don't know what timeline you're trying to perceive from. And at any point in the now, you're forking off into new realities. So this particular now will have multiple futures. And it depends on, there's no one future you will have from any point in the now. So it's impossible to predict a single future, since there is no single future. However, the data that we got back tested two major realities, and there seemed to be a great deal of destruction, indicating that there might be something like meteor impacts that occurred prior to June 1st, 2013, producing tsunami-type or displacement waves that would affect coasts. Well, that was the connection that Cliff was making to his own thinking about the so-called global coastal event. However, and this was done, these sessions were obtained back in 2008. And then in 2013, in the beginning, the discovery of asteroid DA14 and the Russian meteorite that crashed over Russia in mid-2013, both of those things, mid-February 2013, both of those happened within 24 hours. And the probability of that happening, according to CNN, was 100 million to 1, the odds of that happening. So, in reality, in a multiple timeline situation, that's exactly what we'd expect. We'd expect that the data suggested there would be meteor-related events before June 1st, 2013. And back in 2008, when we made those descriptions, there was no such. The DA14 was never discovered, and the Russian meteorite there was no knowledge of that either. They weren't until, very recent. And those are extremely rare events, 100 million to 1.
Yeah.
But basically what happened is, multiple realities is sort of weird, because whenever you take information from the future and you bring it back to the past or to the present, you fork out with a new reality. And so we have to be open to the idea that the Russian meteorite in one reality actually impacted the Earth in a solid chunk. And the reality that would happen would be different from the one that happened here, because if you look at YouTube videos of that meteor, there are some YouTube videos that are widely available showing that the meteor, when it came in over Russia, something behind it approached more quickly, caught up with it, and impacted it and fragmented it right while it was over Russia. Otherwise, it would have landed on Russia as a single solid rock and produced a devastating impact similar to a very large atomic weapon.
That looked very eerily like, what? Oh.
Yeah, you saw the video, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the issue is, now, there's only three things that could have happened. Either it was another meteor that was following it and caught up to it, and at that exact moment hit it and fragmented it. And if the idea of DA14, the asteroid passing within a hair's width of Earth, and the Russian meteorite at the same time was 100 million to 1, then what's the probability of another meteorite hitting the Russian meteorite at the exact same moment as over Russia? That's as close to zero as you can get. I mean, it just couldn't happen. So it has to have been one of the other two possibilities, that it was either an anti-ballistic missile system that the Russians had or the United States had, or it was something that was the extraterrestrials. Now, the extraterrestrial phenomenon is a very interesting thing, because the U.S. government and the Russian governments do have active contact with some extraterrestrial groups, and it's a lot of tension right now as to when that information will become public. That really won't happen until the amnesty issue is resolved. because a lot of things have happened since 1947 when the Roswell crash happened.
Well, we'll talk about that when we come back, Courtney. We're coming up on a break now. When we went to break, you were talking about the amnesty issue, and what exactly are you referencing there?
Well, it's referencing the so-called disclosure project, where they're trying to force the government to, at least the U.S. government, to disclose the fact that there's been extensive extraterrestrial contact since the 1940s, late 1940s. And, the issue is that when the contact actually started, decision was made that the public was not ready for it, and that it had to be kept repressed to avoid panic, things like that. And as a result, they took that request, order, whatever you want to call it, very seriously and very forcefully enforced it. And a lot of bad things happened. Some deaths were involved. A lot of bad things happened. I mean, if you think the struggle we've had with human rights issues relating to Guantanamo and, other events that have been around the world, and those ones become public, you can imagine what happens in any situation when everything is kept totally secret. Just things happen, and when there's no light and when the light of day is not with something, I mean, just things happen, and so right now there's a very serious problem of us not being able to move forward, and at a time when we really need to move forward, because of fear that still hangs over the issue with regard to amnesty. So the idea of open disclosure and sort of everyone talking about the extraterrestrial contact and all of the other implications that it would imply, it'll be like a house of cards collapsing with regard to a whole bunch of ideas and institutions, thoughts, whatever, and from religion to governmental ideas. There has to be a way to catch the amnesty issue, because all those people who were involved need to be forgiven. I mean, they're going to fight to the end and to not have it disclosed, as long as it's possible that they will have to pay for it in some way. And so it's going to have to be like a South Africa situation, where they just had perhaps some tribunals or something. I'm not sure how they're going to, but they're open tribunals where they're just people. I don't think they call them tribunals, but where everyone would just sort of talk about what they did, and as long as you talked about it and got it out into the open, everyone was forgiven, and no one went to prison, and no one paid for anything, no matter what the crime was, including murder. And I think that's going to have to be dealt with sooner or later. And so the whole idea about talking about the extraterrestrials and getting most mainstream people to not roll their eyes, that's going to have to wait until the issue of the amnesty stuff really is dealt with. And there's two things. You see, as long as the governmental authorities and mainstream interests can still contain the situation, they will try to. As long as there's still energy to do that, they will try to. But once they can't contain it any longer, then the issue of amnesty is going to become absolutely crucial, because if you don't deal with the amnesty, then in a situation where they cannot contain it any longer, you have them ferociously fighting to stop it from being publicly disclosed in a situation where it's not going to be able to stop it, and all types of chaos will break loose. So you have to have the amnesty issue in place so that the fighting won't occur.
I thought the citizen disclosure hearings were phenomenal, and I thought that was a really good starting point for putting out the information from very legitimate sources, where it's being presented to the general public, but not in a threatening way. And like you say, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's the ET issue or whether it's, I mean, look at how many scientists, somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 scientists in the last few years have been murdered. Oh, I mean, they just had untimely deaths. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say murdered. You know what I mean?
We really don't know which ones were actually a result of foul play or which ones were accidental, but all that would have to come out. And again, that's not going to come out unless there's an amnesty in place. And the amnesty has to affect everybody, meaning no matter what was done, no matter what happened, for the betterment of the entire human race, we just have to say, and the public has to understand that they're equally responsible for absolutely everything. Because it's one thing to say somebody did some bad things in order to keep the information from the public, but the consciousness of the leadership reflects the consciousness of the people.
Exactly.
Reflects the consciousness of the people. So the reality is that the masses didn't want to hear about this stuff. So if you could tell any ridiculous excuse at all to explain away a sighting, then the reality is that the people who are listening want to hear that ridiculous explanation. For example, the Phoenix Lights. Now, the Phoenix Lights were absolutely clearly extraterrestrial craft. However, what happened was they were sighted traveling horizontally in formation at low altitude over 5 states.
Wow.
And then they eventually really sort of hovered in over Phoenix. They were sighted right over Phoenix and hovered over there for about an hour. And some of them were very low, like right on top of your head. And one of the witnesses was the governor of Arizona, so Keith Symington. So, he was so shook up by the whole thing, his initial response was to try to debunk it so that the people wouldn't panic. But later he confessed and he saw the whole thing, and the ship passed right over his head, and it was so large you could see the bottom of the ship and all the stuff on the bottom, and it blocked out the entire sky. Okay, so what happened? So 6 months later, the United States government put out a military pilot to give an interview saying, those were some flares that we dropped over Phoenix. Now, first of all, and that was it. He just said it stayed in, and that was it. Now, first of all, they waited 6 months. They were trying to come up with what to say. They gave an absolutely ridiculous statement, flares that they dropped over Phoenix. First of all, flares don't hover for an hour.
No kidding.
Over Phoenix, but that ignored the entire fact that those things traveled in formation over 5 states before hovering over Phoenix for an hour. And flares don't block out the entire sky and have an underbelly of a ship with all the paraphernalia that fly right over the head, like just a couple hundred feet above the governor's head. The whole thing is so ridiculous. That
and we're gullible enough to believe it because it was on mainstream media. It's
not gullibility, Glenn. That's the point. It's desire. It's the desire of the public to not face this information. So what happens is that the public is equally responsible with governmental authorities for the entire cover-up. So right. you can't blame the government saying they're the evil people repressing the good thinking masses. They're equal. Okay. The masses wanted to be deceived. They heard absolutely ridiculous explanations.
We're coming up on a break, Courtney. Just hold that thought. This is Morning Brew on Orion Talk Radio Network.
Free speech guaranteed. You're listening to the Orion Talk Radio Network.
At Orion Talk Radio, we're committed to defending the Constitution. We love America, and like you, we're just not so keen on the corporate and political crooks that have stolen it from we the people. The powers that be have taken their shots at us. But we're still here. We've added even more great new shows with more to come, like Live Truth with Brian Lang, America Talks with David Zublick, and News Stalker with Stephen Williams, Bob Green, and Eric Hedrick, 5 days a week. Couple those great news shows with Glenn Caldwell in the Morning Brew, Kevin Bull in the Earth Needs Rebel Show, and Ryan Brooks with the Sound of Freedom. And you've got a weekday lineup that you can depend on for the real truth behind the story. But in the end, it all comes down to you. With over 1 million new listeners in the last year, more people have tuned into Orion Talk Radio than ever before. So thanks for listening and helping spread the truth. Orion Talk Radio, news and views beyond the mainstream media.
So, Courtney, you've got some new things going on, but I'd like you to give out your contact information for our listeners who are not in the chat room.
Well, Glenn, the best way for people to keep up with what we're doing is we're a nonprofit educational and research organization, and we're unique. We're the largest venue anywhere on the planet for the study of the subject of the remote viewing phenomenon as it is done, using the structured data collection procedures that were developed by the United States military and used for espionage purposes, or procedures that are derivative of those. And we do things that are absolutely, completely unique. The absolute best way for people to keep up with what we do is to sign up for our newsletter, because it's free. We send out newsletters very rarely, like sometimes once every 2 months. But it so happens that we're going to be putting out 2 really big announcements in June, in just a couple weeks. So to get to our newsletter, just go to our website, www.farsight.org, because we're a nonprofit. And that's Farsight, Farsight, like seeing far.org. And at the nav bar that's on the left at the very bottom, you'll see a blue link that says subscribe to our free newsletter. So just put your name and email address in there and you're ready to rock. And that's really the only way to do it, because when we come up with a new project, we don't like wave flags in front of we don't buy commercials, we don't buy advertising space, we don't wave flags in front of people's faces. We just let people know on our newsletter, and 2 really, really, really big announcements are coming out in 2 weeks. Actually, within the next 2 weeks. So the newsletter is where really people should really do that. And so that's my big suggestion for you is just to do the newsletter, to sign up for it. However, the projects that we're going to be talking about is a update, because our climate project, which is going to end next Saturday, June 1st, 2013, we're going to give a summary of what happened, where we are with respect to that. And so as I was sort of mentioning, we have to open ourselves to the possibility that the remote viewing actually did change the timeline, because if we bring information back from the future to the present, you always enter into the idea that you can produce another timeline. And the timeline that we would have done, we do know, and we deal with the military people all the time. I mean, Len Buchanan and Glenn Wheaton, 2 military remote viewer instructors, they're the 2 of the biggest in the business, retired military. Glenn Wheaton out of Special Forces, and Len Buchanan out of DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. They're on our board of directors. So, we deal with this type of thing all the time. The point is that if we did bring that project in, and we did, it's certain that the U.S. government would have done something and the other people that watch us would have done something to affect the timeline. For example, that's why the military likes to use remote viewing to prevent terrorist attacks, meaning they actually use it to observe a terrorist attack, and then they change something in the present so that they arrest the terrorist before the terrorist attack happens. So on one time the terrorist attack actually did happen, and another time they prevented it to happen.
Courtney, is that so? If people are aware that this event, and I'm sure plenty of people were aware that of this remote viewing study. So once people become aware of it and it becomes part of their consciousness,
then the timeline can change.
The energy of that what? The emotion, the response to it, praying that it doesn't happen?
Well,
what changes the timeline?
In practical sense, you bring the information back, and then people do things physically that change to another timeline. And so, for example, the big meteor that exploded over Russia, parts of it, in fact, hit the ground, but the whole thing would have hit the ground, producing a nuclear type of explosion, or a nuclear sort of size explosion. And it didn't happen because something hit the meteor while it was flying through our atmosphere right over Russia and fragmented it. And the videos of that are very, very clear. So the question is, what did it? So if it was an anti-ballistic missile system of the Russians or the United States, well, they could not have done that unless they were with the guns drawn and the trigger, cocked. I mean, they were ready. They were ready for it. I mean, they were waiting for something to happen. That meteors come in like a blink of an eye, unlike a missile that's launched from one country to the next, where you see the thing launched, then you follow it through the atmosphere, and then but a meteor comes out of nowhere, and so they had to be. If it was an anti-ballistic missile system that blew up that fragmented the Russian thing, well, and it was the humans that launched it, then they were ready for it, which meant that they would have taken the climate project stuff seriously and, been on high alert. And they would have been on high alert at that time because DA-14, the asteroid, was passing within the orbits of our own satellites. It was really a close thing. Now, the other thing is that if it was the extraterrestrials that got involved, it would have been because the climate project, one very real possibility is that the climate project would have alerted the U.S. government. The government would have then said to its extraterrestrial friends, look, sort this out, will you? If something's going to happen, we want you guys to intervene and help us. Right. Now, there's two things they could have done. A, the extraterrestrials could have hit the meteor, and that's probably one of the more likely things because they have the technological capability to do that more easily. But the second thing is DA-14 really came very, very close. It would have been no big deal at all for the extraterrestrials to nudge it when it was farther out so that it would barely miss rather than impact. Yeah. And so, you have to open yourself up to the possibility that the climate project did bring information back and that the government acted on that, either to ask for help from the extraterrestrials or to do something themselves with anti-ballistic missile systems to prevent some of the things. So, that's how new timelines get formed. Now, Courtney, can I prove this? Go ahead.
Oh, we have another just recently found meteor or something, asteroid or something coming real close to Earth now on May 30th or 31st.
Yeah, in reality, though, actually this entire period over the last 6 months has been jam-packed with an extraordinary high content of meteors, meaning it's not just the big ones that you're talking about. There are in enormous numbers. This has been a nonstop flurry of one meteor after the next. The astronomers are on high alert. They've never seen anything like this. So the meteors that we're talking about here are examples of a larger pattern of a huge flurry of meteors that are coming through our area of space. The other one impacted the moon the other day that was so large you could see it with your naked eye. There's just a lot of meteors coming in, and so this sort of does match our climate project data as well, meaning we were predicting 5 years ago that before June 1st, 2013, there'd be meteor events relating to the Earth. That's what this remote viewing sessions described. And in fact, in essence, that's what we're getting. Now, it may be that the large events that cause the displacement waves have been prevented, but we're still getting the essence of what we described correct.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Courtney, we're coming up on a break, but when we come back, I'd like to kind of hear about what you've been doing in the meantime, and if you've got any other projects that you've been working on. This is Morning Brew on the Orion Talk Radio Network and 1650 AM, Tonawanda, New York. Courtney and I will be right back. Please stay tuned.
Imagine a world with natural clouds, clean air, clean water, and natural food. Why in the world are they spraying? If you love your family, if you love your children, if you love our planet, it's time to get involved. In 2010, millions of people were awakened to the question of what. Now the next question that remains to be answered is, why in the world are they spraying? An investigative look into one of the many agendas associated with chemtrail geoengineering programs, weather control. Why has our weather been changing? Are the long white lines in the sky changing our weather? Could there be a monetary and political agenda behind these damaging programs? Why in the world are they spraying? Order your copy today at www.whyintheworldaretheyspraying.com. Why in the world are they spraying?
And if you control the weather, you're going to control the planet. It's that simple.
Our time is short, Courtney. It's always too short to cover everything, it seems. But so NASA, we've got all these incoming asteroids or meteors or whatever you want to call them. And in the midst of that, NASA decides that they're not going to report these anymore. And so what are your thoughts on that?
They've moved it to a classified categorization. So they're no longer publicly reporting it, but now the information is considered classified. So there's a huge new flurry of meteors coming in, and it has caught the mainstream scientists, astronomers, totally blindsided. They had no idea this was happening or going to happen. And just like anything that can rattle the public, they choose to keep it secret. So they took the information offline so people can't watch it. So, that doesn't stop the meteors, but it does stop the reporting, and hopefully from their perspective, the public speculation, which could lead to panic, etc., things like that. So, but that is part of a larger pattern that is involved with the disclosure issue that is going to have to be addressed. And they indeed are going to have to address it. It's not going to be possible to avoid it forever, but they're going to try to hold off as long as possible. However, we have a really big project. I actually don't like to worry too much about the disclosure issue or the public knowing or not knowing or what the government's doing, because it's like waiting for Godot. It's like, why worry about it?
Right.
I mean, I'd much rather go off and do new and interesting projects. And for those people who are interested and are awake, they can watch us. And so, again, I'll tell you now about something we're coming up to in June. And this is another one of the things we're going to be announcing in June. We want you to all connect up, all of your listeners, to connect up with us using the Farsight Institute's free newsletter, which is found on our website, www.farsight.org, Farsight, like seeing far.org. At the bottom of the nav bar, there's a big link saying, sign up for our free newsletter. Just put your email address and name in there, and you're ready to go. We send out issues very rarely, but when we send them out, they're big. And we have two really biggies coming up in June. And I already mentioned first, which is a summary of our climate project results, which ends on June 1st. But the other big one is we've completed a major project. The remote viewing data have been up on our website for a while now, but where we're finally releasing a DVD that explains all of the data and the implications that we call the Atlantis project. You see, one of the things that's going to have to be disclosed is not just extraterrestrial stuff, but human civilization stuff. The fantasy, the fiction that humans evolved out of apes just recently is going to collapse, and it's going to become clear that there were humans around on this planet for a long time. But what we are doing is having a project that we call the Atlantis project, because sometime within the last 100,000 years, there was a very advanced, technologically advanced civilization of us. And it destroyed itself. It destroyed itself through its own reckless use of science. And we found out the entire project. We found out the entire story, what the last moments were like, what caused it, what everything.
Wow.
And we put it all together, and it's coming out. And the data are up there on the website now, but you really sort of see someone to sort of lead you through the whole thing. And that is going to be announced in June. Plus, about 14 minutes of the DVD will also be available as a free YouTube video, so people we don't like people to buy our stuff without knowing for real everything that what is there. And so we don't give like 30-second trailers. We let people see a good hefty chunk so that you know exactly what you're getting, and the motivation for explaining it, for showing that there was a highly advanced, technologically advanced civilization on Earth, us. It was not some alien group, it was us. Only say maybe 70,000 years ago. And that we destroyed ourselves and buckled the planet, and the civilization sunk. And, science gone astray can do it again. Secrecy cloaked science can do it again. So we have to learn from our past. And the really interesting thing about it is that we have really good remote viewing data for it, but we also have very good archaeological data for it. So we know where the ruins are. We have good pictures. We got good images. I mean, it's a little bit of cloak and dagger story in there. It's really very fascinating. And so if you sign up for our free newsletter, you'll hear about it. If you don't sign up for the newsletter, you won't hear about it, because we don't advertise. We don't do anything to sort of wave a flag in front of people's heads. So the newsletter is a must for people who want to keep connected. Now, the other thing is that if you read a archaeological book, very serious one, for example, Forbidden Archaeology by Michael Cremo, what you'll see is that the archaeological data that is supported by mainstream archaeologists is fudged. They have lots of evidence, tons of evidence, that humans have been around for a very long time. Anatomically correct humans have been around for millions of years. And that information is just suppressed. And, Michael Cremo, that book is a really fat book. He details in explicit detail one finding after the next, showing how the information has been suppressed, people have lost their jobs, and goes through the artifacts, the whole thing. So, the whole house of cards, not just of the extraterrestrial phenomenon, but our history on the planet, that whole house of cards is going to collapse from all sorts of different directions. And so it's for those people who are tuned in, turned on. You might as well hear about what happened to our most recent civilization when it collapsed. There was stuff before that too.
Courtney, you also did a Crucifixion remote viewing that is available on DVD now, correct?
Yeah, we did a project about the Crucifixion drama, and that was really an interesting project. However, that was so controversial that the board of directors, remember I lead the board of directors, but the board of directors voted it down as an official project for the Farsight Institute. So we had to release it as a unofficial, independent project, but it still involved myself and involved one of the leading remote military-grade remote viewers on the planet, Daz Smith, and it was a complete analysis of what actually did happen during the so-called Crucifixion drama. And it has its own website, crucifixionruse.com. And, for those who are interested in that type of ancient past reality, that's what happened. The entire biblical story of the crucifixion is not right. And what actually did happen, according to the data, and the data were again collected by a very competent remote viewer under squeaky clean blind conditions. It's really good. What actually did happen is that there was a conspiracy that a few disciples, very few, like a couple, knew that Jesus was going to be arrested and killed. That's what they did. The authorities did that to people who amassed a following. It was no surprise. And they acted to prevent that. There was essentially a mentally ill person who thought he was a messiah, who was a hangers-on to the group of the masses that were following them. And Judas and perhaps one or two others went to him and said, "You're right, you're the guy, you're the dude, you're the man." And we need, by the way, a blood sacrifice. Would you want to do it? I mean, fulfills biblical prophecy. And the guy agreed. He was mentally ill. And Judas's role was to lead the authorities to that guy to make sure that they didn't pick up the real Jesus, and Jesus was hidden somewhere. And that's what happened. And they drugged him so that he wouldn't feel so much pain, which is why he didn't answer back when he would ask questions. That's also why Peter denied him 3 times, because Peter was not in on the conspiracy and honestly didn't know that guy. And so basically that's what happened. And we got the whole story on that.
Fascinating.
Who the guy was, the background, where Jesus was, where Judas was, how Judas died. The Bible says 2 different stories, both of which are not true. One that he fell down on a field and his bowels gushed out, and another one where he hanged himself. Neither one was true. He was arrested by the military authorities and he died in prison. So, I mean, he died at their hands in prison. So, wow. I mean, we got the whole story, and that's available on the DVD. But again, that was so crucial. That was so controversial that the board said, without even looking at the data, said, no, that's not going to come out of the project. But it's still out. It's still out as an independent project. Crucifixionruse.com is where they can hear about it.
Courtney,
and the first 22 minutes of it is available for free on the web, so,
Thank you for joining me today. And again, the newsletter is at farsight.org so that you can stay abreast of Courtney's work. Thank you, Courtney. Everyone have a good week.
Same with you. Thanks for inviting me, Gwen.
Yep. Have a good one.